Imagine this. You're in the midst of a heated argument. Your heart is racing, every word feels like a weapon, and every sentence is a battle. You're preparing your next response, eager to prove you're right, but the other person? They're doing the exact same thing. Neither of you is listening, only waiting for a chance to strike back. It's a battle of egos. And then suddenly, a voice whispers something unsettling in your ear. You've already lost. What does that mean? You're standing your ground, defending yourself, convinced you're right. How could that be defeat? This is where a powerful philosophy steps in. According to Nietzsche, the moment you engage in this kind of battle, you've already surrendered your power. Real strength, he argues, doesn't come from fighting to prove you're right. It comes from something far more unexpected. So, what's this hidden power? And why is silence often louder than words? Let's explore Nietzsche's philosophy and discover the silent trick that holds real power. Have you ever noticed how many assume that true power lies in winning arguments, proving others wrong, and dominating conversations? It's almost as if the louder you are, the more powerful you seem. But Friedrich Nietzsche offered a different perspective, one that challenges this common belief. Nietzsche saw real power, not in words or debates, but in control. Control over your emotions, your responses, and above all, the situation at hand. Think about it for a moment. Why do people argue? Have you really paused to consider? Why do tempers flare and conversations escalate so quickly? Nietzsche argued that the root of most disputes isn't truth, but a deeper psychological need: ego protection. People engage in arguments because they equate being wrong with losing a part of themselves, making them feel less valid or valuable. Our minds, in their quest to protect our identities, resist this at all costs. When someone feels attacked, their instinct is to defend, even if the logic doesn't quite support their stance. It's a primal reaction. But Nietzsche saw something more. To him, arguments were also about power struggles. Often, debates aren't truly about facts or logic. They're about control. Who speaks last, who sets the tone, and who makes the other back down. These small victories may feel empowering, but Nietzsche viewed them as signs of weakness. When we argue in an emotional state, we inadvertently expose our insecurities, fears, and triggers, losing control in the process. If someone provokes you into a reaction, you've already surrendered your power. Nietzsche introduced the concept of the will to power, which is often misunderstood. It's not about brute force or traditional domination. Instead, it's the ability to impose your will on reality, to shape the world according to your vision. Sometimes, the most powerful action is inaction, not reacting at all. True strength lies in staying calm, composed, and deciding whether or not to engage in the argument. This brings us to the Ubermensch, Nietzsche's ideal human who transcends the need to win arguments or prove points. The Ubermensch chooses when to engage and when to remain silent, understanding that true power is about controlling the interaction, not fighting for its own sake. In any heated exchange, who truly holds the power? It's not the person who shouts the loudest or insists the most. It's the one who remains calm, listens more than they speak, and manages their emotions. The moment you lose control of yourself, you lose the battle. It's not about winning or losing in the traditional sense. It's about maintaining control over yourself in the interaction. For Nietzsche, this mastery over oneself and the choice to let silence be your most powerful tool is the essence of power. In life, we often think of power as something loud and forceful, but Friedrich Nietzsche had a different take on it. His idea of the will to power isn't about using brute force. Instead, it's about a subtle yet profound ability to shape reality. Sometimes, real strength comes not from speaking out, but from staying silent, exercising restraint, and maintaining control over oneself. This brings us to Nietzsche's intriguing concept of the Ubermensch, or overman. Imagine a person who embodies self-mastery and emotional control, someone who can influence the world without getting caught up in petty conflicts. The Ubermensch doesn't argue to prove they're right or to boost their ego. They know when to engage and when to hold back, realizing that silence can be a powerful form of control. Consider an argument between two people. One is loud, trying desperately to prove their point. The other remains calm, taking everything in before deciding to speak. This second person listens more than they talk, refusing to be pulled into an emotional tug-of-war. They choose their words carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to make an impact. So, who truly holds the power here? It might seem like the loudest person does, but Nietzsche would say the opposite. True power belongs to the one who stays emotionally unaffected, who controls their own responses and picks their battles wisely. Why does Nietzsche value silence so highly? Because silence isn't just about not speaking, it's a strategic tool. Silence lets you observe, analyze, and steer the conversation without uttering a word. It can make others uncomfortable or unsure, leading them to question their own stance. In this moment of uncertainty, the silent person holds the real power. The Ubermensch doesn't remain silent just to avoid confrontation. They use silence skillfully, like a well-timed pause that shifts the dynamic in their favor. Silence isn't passive, it's a deliberate choice, a way to manipulate time and control. Imagine you're in a heated discussion. The other person is throwing facts and emotions at you, trying to provoke a reaction. But like the Ubermensch, you remain calm. You don't react impulsively, you listen and maintain your composure. By doing this, you control the conversation. This isn't about being passive. It's about having the wisdom to recognize that not every argument is worth your energy. The Ubermensch knows that true mastery comes from not giving in to emotional responses. Just by choosing not to engage emotionally, they've already gained the upper hand. In a world where everyone is eager to be right and win arguments, the Ubermensch stands apart. They don't need to win in the traditional sense, because their strength lies in the control they maintain over themselves and the situation. Nietzsche understood that true power isn't about loudness or the number of facts you can throw at someone. It's about shaping interactions on your terms. And sometimes, the most effective way to do that is through silence, calmness, and control. Silence isn't a sign of a weakness. It's the ultimate strength, the most profound form of control. The Ubermensch knows this, and it's their ability to use silence strategically that truly gives them power. Silence, when wielded wisely, isn't a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it's a potent psychological asset. It compels others to reveal more than they intended, leaving them to second-guess their words, actions, and even their stance. Silence is uncomfortable, creating tension, and tension is powerful because it makes others uneasy, giving you the upper hand. Throughout history, the most influential individuals have understood the strategic power of silence. It's not just about withholding words. It's about using silence as a tool for manipulation, influence, and control. In a heated debate, staying silent doesn't mean you're ignoring the other person or dodging the conversation. Instead, you're crafting a space, allowing others to fill it with their words and emotions, ultimately placing you in control. Picture yourself in a heated exchange. The other person is passionate, perhaps even loud, trying to overwhelm you with their opinions. But instead of reacting immediately, you remain calm. You pause. This silence, is your strength. It forces the other person to keep talking, and as they do, they reveal their arguments, emotions, and insecurities. In that very moment, the control shifts to you. The essence of silence lies not just in not speaking, but in mastering the timing of your words. By staying silent at crucial moments, you can choose the perfect moment to engage. This pause allows you to assess the situation, listen intently, and grasp the motivations of the other person. When you finally speak, your words carry immense weight, amplified by the silence that preceded them. Consider this. When someone tries to provoke you, they anticipate a reaction. They want you defensive or emotional. By not giving them that reaction, you disrupt their expectations and strip them of the power they sought. You maintain your composure, gaining insight into their thoughts and motivations. You're not a passive participant. You're actively steering the interaction, even in silence. There's significant strength in maintaining silence and composure. In any social setting, the person who speaks the most doesn't always hold the power. Often, the most influential are those who speak less. They don't interrupt or over-explain. They conserve their energy and speak with purpose, commanding attention because their silence exudes authority. Great leaders and thinkers, like Socrates, understood the power of silence. Socrates didn't need to shout to make his point. He used silence and questioning to let others reveal themselves, then shifted the conversation with a single, insightful question. Similarly, Steve Jobs didn't argue for argument's sake. He orchestrated discussions, subtly guiding them toward his vision without overtly imposing his views. Nietzsche's Ubermensch doesn't engage in every skirmish. They conserve their energy, knowing when to engage and when to let silence speak for them. In this context, silence isn't passive. It's an active strategy to control interaction flow, defy expectations, and maintain authority without overt conflict. Silence also exposes others' weaknesses. When you stay silent, others fill the space, often revealing more than they intended. Their emotional triggers, insecurities, and assumptions come to light. Withholding your response places you in control. Mastering strategic silence allows you to observe, assess, and act when the time is right. The Ubermensch uses silence not to avoid, but to control, strategize, and influence. By mastering silence, you stop reacting to every minor provocation, gaining awareness of your surroundings and control over your interactions. Power isn't about defending your ideas incessantly or proving yourself right. It's about knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. In that silence, you hold true power. Because you've mastered influence without needing to prove yourself. Let's dive deeper into how legendary figures throughout history have mastered the art of silence and used it to wield unparalleled power. We'll explore 3 figures who perfectly embodied Nietzsche's principle of silent control: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. These 3 individuals didn't rely on loud arguments or forceful actions. Instead, they understood that silence, restraint, and strategic control were often the most powerful tools at their disposal. Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, is often regarded as one of the greatest minds in history. But what set him apart wasn't just his intellect, it was his ability to lead others to knowledge without ever directly telling them what was right or wrong. Socrates didn't engage in traditional arguments, where he would argue loudly or try to overpower others. Instead, he used a technique so powerful that it's still used today: the Socratic method. This method involved asking pointed questions that led others to discover contradictions in their own beliefs. Imagine a proud Athenian politician who confidently claims to be the wisest man in Athens. Instead of outright challenging him, Socrates would simply ask, "What is wisdom?" The politician, eager to prove his wisdom, would start defining it. But with each question Socrates asked, the politician's definition would fall apart. Socrates didn't need to argue with him. He made him realize, on his own, that he didn't truly understand the concept he claimed to master. Socrates' strength lay not in silencing his opponents with brute force, but in leading them to silence themselves through introspection. Steve Jobs, the iconic co-founder of Apple, mastered the art of persuasion without ever needing to raise his voice in anger. Jobs understood that power wasn't in debating every detail, but in controlling the larger conversation and knowing when to engage fully. One famous example of this was his battle with his own engineering team over the design of the first iPhone. The engineers wanted physical buttons, but Jobs was determined to have a full touchscreen device. Rather than endlessly arguing with his team, Jobs let them debate the idea and voice their concerns. He didn't push his vision on them. Instead, he guided them through the process, making them realize that a touchscreen phone wasn't just possible. It was the inevitable future of technology. Jobs didn't need to dominate the conversation with loud arguments. He used restraint and emotional control to allow his team to arrive at the right conclusion themselves. Through strategic silence and persuasion, Jobs made them believe it was their idea all along. In this way, he didn't argue to win. He argued to guide, inspire, and make people believe in his vision. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, took Nietzsche's idea of strategic silence and emotional control to another level. Musashi, a master of swordsmanship, won over 60 duels throughout his life, not through sheer physical prowess, but by using psychological strategy. His most famous duel was with the master swordsman Sasaki Kojiro. Instead of meeting Kojiro head-on, Musashi showed up hours late to the duel. By the time Kojiro faced him, he was filled with anger and impatience, which clouded his judgment. Musashi's silence and patience unnerved Kojiro, who made crucial mistakes, allowing Musashi to defeat him easily. Musashi knew that anger, impatience, and emotional reactions were signs of weakness. By remaining silent and controlled, Musashi was able to manipulate the psychological state of his opponent, and this mental dominance was what led to his victory. In this sense, Musashi's silence wasn't passive. It was a weapon, one that made his opponent's emotions work in his favor. Musashi understood that true power often lies in psychological warfare and knowing when to make your move, not necessarily in physical action. These three figures, Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Musashi, all understood the profound strength of silence. They didn't waste energy on pointless arguments or reactive behavior. Instead, they used silence as a tool to lead, persuade, and control. Whether through Socrates' questioning, Jobs' strategic restraint, or Musashi's psychological warfare, all three embodied the idea that true power doesn't come from speaking the loudest or dominating the conversation. It comes from knowing when to stay silent, observe, and then make your move when it counts. What do Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi all have in common? They didn't waste energy on pointless arguments or emotional reactions. They didn't engage in every battle or attempt to overpower their opponents with sheer force or words. Instead, they controlled the flow of interaction, knew when to speak, and, more importantly, knew when to remain silent. This mastery of silence, restraint, and strategic timing is what set them apart and allowed them to wield a power that others couldn't even comprehend. In today's world, many of us fall into the trap of reacting immediately, trying to win every argument or proving ourselves right. But the true power, as Nietzsche suggests, doesn't lie in these short-term victories. Power lies in controlling the entire situation, your reactions, your words, and even your silence. Think about it. Every argument is an opportunity. It's not necessarily about defending your ideas or being right. It's about shaping the interaction to work in your favor. The person who can control their emotions, who doesn't react impulsively, who remains calm and measured, holds the upper hand. They guide the conversation, not through dominance, but through mastery of self. When you remain silent at key moments, you force the other person to reveal more about themselves. You make them question their own words, their own position. Silence, in this sense, becomes not a passive retreat, but an active force. It unsettles the other person and shifts the psychological dynamic in your favor. So, next time you find yourself in an argument, pause. Don't rush to defend your ego. Observe. Let the other person fill the silence. Watch how they react, and when you finally speak, let your words carry the weight of your calm control. This is where true power lies, mastering the conversation with silence and restraint. Let's now move from philosophy and business to the battlefield, where the concept of silence and psychological mastery is put into real practice. Miyamoto Musashi, one of the most legendary figures in history, embodied the art of silence and mental control like no other. Known as the undefeated samurai, Musashi fought over 60 duels throughout his life, not with just physical skill, but with a mastery of psychological warfare. His greatest victories were often achieved before the fight even began. One of Musashi's most famous duels was with Sasaki Kojiro, a master swordsman renowned for his speed and skill. But Musashi didn't challenge Kojiro head-on. Instead, he employed an unusual tactic. He arrived at the duel hours late. By the time Kojiro was ready to fight, his patience was worn thin, and his anger began to take over. Musashi had carefully orchestrated the situation. The longer Kojiro waited, the more his emotions clouded his judgment. When the duel finally began, Kojiro was so blinded by rage that he made crucial mistakes, allowing Musashi to defeat him with ease. This strategy of making his opponent's emotions work in his favor is a perfect example of the power of silence. Musashi understood something profound. If you can control the emotions of your opponent, you can dominate the entire interaction. By remaining calm and not reacting to Kojiro's provocations, Musashi was able to destabilize his opponent's mindset, turning Kojiro's emotional state into his weakness. This isn't just about fighting, it's about psychological dominance. Musashi knew that silence could unsettle, disorient, and create doubt in the mind of his adversary. When you remain silent and unflinching, when you refuse to react emotionally, you strip away the confidence of the other person. They no longer know how to engage with you, and in that moment of uncertainty, you control the battle. Musashi's genius lay in his understanding that the best way to win a fight was to never draw your sword. Instead, he used patience, psychological control, and of course, strategic silence to ensure that his opponent's mind was already defeated before the physical confrontation even began. What unites Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi? At first glance, they seem to operate in completely different realms: philosophy, business, and combat. But the thread that ties them together is their understanding and mastery of silence. They didn't engage in every battle, and they didn't waste their energy reacting to every challenge. Instead, they each recognized that silence, used strategically, could be a far more powerful tool than any argument, fight, or show of force. The concept of silence isn't about passivity, it's about control. It's about choosing when to act, when to speak, and when to let your presence, your restraint, and your calm be the most powerful force in the room. Silence gives you time to observe, to understand the dynamics of the situation, and to assess whether engaging in the conflict is worth your energy. In this way, silence becomes an active, deliberate choice. In any situation, whether it's a heated conversation, a business negotiation, or a confrontation, the person who remains calm and composed is often the one who holds the power. They don't need to shout over others or dominate the conversation. They don't need to prove their point at every turn. Instead, they control the flow of the interaction by choosing when to speak and, crucially, when to stay silent. The person who remains silent isn't the one who loses the conversation. In fact, they often gain the upper hand. They force the other person to reveal more about themselves, their insecurities, and their position. Silence creates discomfort in others. It puts them in a psychological position where they're unsure of what's happening or how to proceed. They become unsettled. And in that uncertainty, you hold the power. This strategic silence doesn't mean avoiding conflict entirely. It's not about running from challenges. It's about choosing your battles wisely. Not every fight is worth engaging in, but when the time comes to speak or act, your words and actions carry far more weight because you've already established control through your silence. Whether in the realms of intellectual debates, business strategy, or physical combat, the ability to control a conversation or confrontation by remaining calm and composed is a hallmark of true power. Just like Socrates, Jobs, and Musashi, the mastery of silence is the key to controlling your environment and shaping outcomes in your favor. The power of silence lies not in its absence, but in its ability to shift dynamics, making it one of the most potent forces in any interaction. Silence forces others to speak, to reveal more than they intended, and to second-guess their words. This is how true power is maintained, not by defending yourself constantly, but by letting others expose their own weaknesses. The more you remain composed, the more others begin to feel the pressure of their own vulnerability. Think about powerful individuals in history. They rarely speak impulsively or react emotionally. They understand that power isn't about arguing to win, it's about controlling when and how you engage. By choosing your moments, by speaking only when necessary, and using silence as your ally, you manipulate the course of any discussion or conflict. Silence makes others lean in, makes them uneasy, and in doing so gives you the upper hand. In this control, true power lies. If you found this exploration into the power of silence and control intriguing, imagine how much more you can achieve when you master these strategies in your own life. Don't just react to the world, take charge of your interactions, whether in conversations, debates, or negotiations. If you want more insights on how to harness the true strength of silence, subscribe now and hit the bell icon. Join us for more powerful lessons on mastering influence, control, and personal growth.